And I'm very pleased to be here. I love ResFest. It's the best thing, and I'm really pleased to be part of this one. So, a technical and art historical study of 9 early experimental paintings by British Jewish artist Mark Gertler, made between 1911 and 1918, has led to new discoveries of the artist's working practices during a period of profound stylistic development in his painted work. What's interesting to me, and unusual, is that Gertler's correspondence with his friends and contemporaries survives, in which he gives details about the development of his compositions as he painted them. And that can be supported by technical evidence from imaging of the paintings. And what I'm going to do is present a few highlights of the study that I did together with my research partner. So Mark Gertler was born in 1891 in a slum lodging house in Spitalfields in the heart of London's Jewish East End. His immigrant parents were amongst 120,000 Jews who came to Britain from Eastern Europe between 1880 and 1910. And Sarah McDougall, who you can see here, who's originally Scottish, this is my raison d'etre to be here, the head of collections at the Ben-Uri Art Gallery in London, and leading expert in Gertler's life, art and letters, and I have collaborated on the first technical historical study of 11 of Gertler's early works. Part of my motivation to do this research was an opportunity to find out about my own family background, my father and grandparents, who had a similar background to Mark Gertler's. These are examples of Gertler's early paintings of his family. His formidable mother, a bit like my grandmother really. His family were fruit sellers, and scenes from the Jewish East End of London at the turn of the 20th century. Between 1908 and 1911, with a loan from the Jewish Education Aid Society, Gertler attended the Slade School of Art, and he was the youngest Jewish working class student of his generation to be admitted. His contemporaries at the Slade and wider Bloomsbury circle included David Bomberg, Paul Nash, Edward Wadsworth, Christopher Nevinson, Stanley Spencer, and notably Dora Carrington, who's circled in red in the photo, with whom he had a complex but largely unrequited love affair. He met and befriended a wider circle of literary and artistic circles, partly through introductions by his patron, Lady Ottilie Morell, who held soirees at Garsington Manor, her house in Oxfordshire. In the 1930s, he also knew the most famous painting restorer of his time, Helmut Ruhrmann, a German Jew who had escaped to London, where he worked at the National Gallery and at the Courtauld, where he conserved some of Britain's most famous paintings. So I thought I'd include that as a relationship. The project was sparked by the technical examination of a small panel by the artist, The Pond at Garsington, dated 1916. An X-ray of the painting, turned portrait-wise in black and white here, clearly shows a painting of a carousel with horses running around its base under the landscape. This was a discovery of a previously unknown preparatory oil study for Gertler's most outstanding contribution to early British modernism, the merry-go-round, which was painted in the same year and is now on display at Tate Britain. The merry-go-round was created in the midst of the war years and was described by the author D.H. Lawrence as the best modern picture that he'd ever seen. Although, did that change? Yeah. Although drawings of individual figures in the composition were known, there was, before the X-ray revelation, no evidence of the planning of the whole composition. Several differences between the sketch and the final painting can be seen in the X-ray, including the stick-like style of painted horses that were clearly influenced by the work of his contemporary David Bomberg that Gertler would have seen at the exhibition the year before. I think you can see the stick-like horses in Bomberg's work here, which he copied initially and then overpainted with a more regular form of horses later in the final composition. There are links between paintings. On the back of the Garsington panel is a sketch for the standing figure of Gilbert Cannon that was subsequently developed into a portrait of Cannon, a writer and dramatist, with his dogs and mill that is now in Oxford's Ashmolean Museum. Gertler later fell out after the publication of Mendel, a novel by Cannon that focused on the central character transparently based on Gertler, that depicted him as unflatteringly as an egotistical Jewish peasant. An X-ray of Gilbert Cannon and his mill shows that it was painted over a completely different underlying composition, a portrait of a rabbi and his wife, a Rebbitzin. There is no known painted version of this, however. There is a drawing for the composition which was squared up for transfer, which does survive, the image on the right, which is dated 1914. So the painting was painted over and he rejected it, but he did plan it out. Gertler signed and dated this picture of the rabbi and grandchild in May 1913. The composition was influenced by Renaissance paintings, and there's an example here by Ghirlandaio that shows a similar scheme. Sarah McDougall found a number of letters that described the evolution of this composition. With technical examination, we were able to follow the different stages that he described. The composition was begun after Gertler secured the services of a sitter he referred to as Old Jew in March 1913. He made the sketch on the right before beginning the painting. Later in the same month, Gertler wrote to Dora Carrington describing how he had turned my Jew picture into a different thing altogether. It suddenly occurred to me how wonderful it would be to have my little girl's head next to his. So now the scheme is just two heads together, his very old, pale and wrinkled head, near that healthy, fresh young face of my little girl. The old man will be the one that had the most delicately touching the girl's face, and the other will be round her shoulder. And I'm terribly inspired with this idea and feel it's sure to be one of the best things I've ever painted. An infrared image of the painting on the right, on your right, revealed the rabbi's hand, just as described in the letter, around the shoulder of the girl, that was later painted over in the final stage of the composition on the left. A few weeks later, he wrote to Dora again. I'm still working on my little picture. I have now added another head, a girl. So there is the Jew and two girls. And in a final letter, he added, an alteration in my picture of the old Jew. I'm going to put one girl's head instead of the profile one. I'm sure you'll approve. An X-radiograph of the rabbi and grandchild on the left, on your right, provides evidence for the changes made by the artist, revealing a fully worked up face of the child on the left of the composition, which is circled in red. I hope you can see the profile, which was later painted out. Both the X-ray and infrared images of the painting show that Gertler initially painted the rabbi's left hand around the child's shoulder, and that the elements of flowers, perhaps fruit, are evident in the lower left, although these two have been painted over in the final composition in favour of a more dramatic, simplified version. The ragged lower edge of the canvas is visible in the X-ray, which suggests that the canvas was cut down. Dora Pranklowski, the daughter of Gertler's butcher, was 8 years old when she posed for the figure of the grandchild. 30 years on, she left an account of her sittings, supporting the suggestion that the painting was initially planned as a larger painting, and she said, he did several pencil drawings of me. I never actually saw him use paints. I think I went to the studio to sit for him for a period of about a year. However, I do remember seeing a very large painting of myself sitting on the knee of a rabbi. It was a full-length picture. I remember particularly my socks. I also recall running home and asking my mother how Mark Gertler could possibly have painted the picture. I'd never met or seen the old man. These paintings I've shown you are just selected highlights from our study of paintings by Gertler from regional museums and private collections in the UK, from Southampton, Swansea, Leeds, Leicester, Oxford and London. And our findings will soon be published in a long essay in British Art Studies. Gertler died in June 1939, aged 48. It's thought that the fear of the forthcoming war, the failure of his marriage, and the suicide of Dora Carrington in 1932 contributed to his decision to take his own life. The studies provided some really fascinating insights, not only into Gertler's painting methods, but also to the social history of artistic circles in London in the early 20th century. Thank you.